All right, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you're having a little bit of deja vu. Hopefully you see this page of notes and you feel like, hey, I've done this before, because guess what? Hey, we've done this before. The only difference is now we're distributing with the Santa hat, but we're using rational numbers. We're not just using integers anymore. Now we're going to start using decimals. We're going to start using fractions. We're going to start using different forms of rational numbers in the math that we've already done this year. So the next couple of videos are going to be a review. It's stuff that you've already learned how to do. You've already learned how to distribute. You've already learned how to combine like terms and simplify and solve. But now we're doing it with rational numbers. So the idea here is that it would be a little bit of a review for you to go through and see this again. And also that because you've already learned it with integers, you would be a little bit more comfortable now that we're working with fractions and other forms of rational numbers. Historically, for whatever reason, fractions scare you, mostly because your elementary teachers were scared by fractions because they didn't understand how they work. And so it's made you nervous about working with them. But this year, a fraction, all we're going to treat it as is any other number. We don't have to worry too much about multiplying, adding, subtracting them, dividing them, because at the end of the day, the calculator is going to do a lot of that for us. We just want to make sure that we're putting it in correctly and that we're using it the right way. So we're going to go back to distribution. We're still going to use the Santa hat. Just this time, instead of having integers out in front and integers on the inside, we're going to have a mix of different kinds of numbers. So step one, again, you've seen this before. It's to circle the number and the sign attached to it. We're going to circle the number and the sign attached to the front of the parentheses. And I've got 4 new examples here for you, and I'm going to go through and do this on each example. On this first one, the only thing in front of my parentheses is 3/5, 3 over 5. In my second example, I've got 3.75 in front of my parenthesis, but attached to it in front of that 3.75 is a negative, so I'm going to make sure that I include that negative sign. The third example here, I don't have a number that I can see, so we're going to treat it like there's an imaginary 1 right there, but I do have a negative sign, so we're going to be distributing a negative 1 on that problem. And the last one, I've got a negative 7/2 right in front of the parenthesis, but I also have this 12 floating around. Most of you have gotten this down really well, that you remember this 12, it's not attached to the parentheses. So when we're distributing, we don't care about it at all. We just want to circle this negative 7/2 and make sure that's what we distribute. Okay, so moving on. Step 2, we're going to draw a line from our circle that we made to each term inside the parenthesis. We want to go to each term inside the parenthesis, which means the number and the variable attached to it and its sign. Remember, that's what a term is. So on this first example, we've already circled our 3/5. Now I'm going to draw a line from my 3/5 to my 2x and from my 3/5 to my plus 25/9. Second example, I've circled negative 3.75, and now I'm going to draw a line from there to my 2.2x, and again from the circle to my negative 4. And I'm going to be really careful on this problem not to forget about the negative. Example 3, I've already circled my negative 1, and I'm going to draw a line to my negative 4.5, and I'm going to draw a line to my plus 5.3 x's. All right, and then example 4, I've circled negative 7/2. I'm ignoring this 12 a little bit right now, and I'm going to draw a line from my circle to 4/5 x, and then from my circle to negative 4 2/3. Okay? I know we're going fast, but we've already done this before. You've practiced circling this number. I've seen most of your Santa hats, and even though they look really goofy sometimes, for the most part, you guys are really good at doing this. The only thing we need to be careful of now is that we're not just multiplying integers. We're multiplying fractions and decimals, so we're going to check our work a little bit closer and let the calculator do a little bit more of that for us. So, step 3. Multiply. We're going to use an addition symbol, not a addition symbol. We're going to use an addition symbol between each set of multiplication, and then we're going to simplify as much as possible. The nice thing about the calculator doing the work for us is we're not really going to have to simplify very much because it does that for us. When we multiply 3 over 5 times 2x, it's going to simplify and give it to us in the easiest form. So let's go ahead and start doing that. I'm going to pull out the calculator, kind of walk you through this a little bit, let you see what it looks like, and hopefully your answers are looking the same as mine. So we've got 3/5. We need to multiply that by 2. So on my calculator, we're going to do 3/5, and to do that I hit my fraction button, 3/5, and I'm going to multiply that by 2. Again, I'm not putting in the x because that doesn't exist on my calculator. I'm just going to multiply that by 2. So I got 3/5, and I times that by 2. That gives me 6/5. So I'm going to write that down here, 6/5, and I'm going to remember to include that x. So 6/5 x, and then I always put a plus, and now I'm going to multiply my second one, 3/5 times 25/9. So I'm going to use my fraction button, 3/5 times, and another fraction, 25 over 9. It looks like I want it to, 3/5 times 25/9, and when I hit enter, my answer becomes 5/3. So 6/5 x plus a positive 5/3. So I've got some x's right here. I've got a constant here, no x's involved, so I can't put these two together. So as of now, this is as simple as my problem can get. So let's move on to the next example. Negative 3.75. I need to multiply what's in the circle by each term on the inside. So negative 3.75 multiplied by 2.2x. Hit enter, and I get negative 8.25x. Negative 8.25x, and then I'm going to put a plus sign because I always do in between each of these. And again, I'm going to do this negative 3.75 multiplied by negative 4. And we want to be careful not to forget that negative. So negative 3.75 multiplied by negative 4, and that gives me a positive 15. So I have negative 8.25 x's plus 15. Moving on, my negative 1 that I'm distributing, I'm going to use the shortcut because I remember that from before. If I'm multiplying everything on the inside by a negative 1, my numbers all stay the same. The only thing I have to change is the sign. So a negative 1 times a negative 4.5 is just a 4.5, a positive 4.5. And then I put a plus, because I always do, and a negative 1 times a positive 5.3 x's becomes a negative 5.3 x's. So my answer is 4.5 plus negative 5.3x, or if you don't like having the plus or minus, you can change it to 4.5 minus 5.3x. Either one of those works for me. All right, and then our last example. We have this negative 7/2 that we have to distribute to the 4/5 x. And the only difference here is we have this little 12 kind of floating around out front. So I'm going to rewrite that 12 plus negative 7/2 times 4/5 x. So I'm going to do my negative out front, negative 7/2 times 4/5. So I need another fraction. Hit enter, and I get negative 14/5. So 12 plus a negative 14/5, and I want to remember that x. I don't want that to go away. And then I put another plus sign. Now I've got negative 7/2 multiplied by negative 4 2/3. So I'm going to put negative fraction 7/2 multiplied by negative 4 2/3. Now I want to look at my picture before I hit enter. I've got negative 7/2, which is what I want, times negative 4 2/3, which is what I want. So it looks correct, so I hit enter, and I get an answer of 49/3. So 12 plus negative 14/5 x plus 49/3. Now everything's simplified as much as they can. Our fractions are already simplified. This expression can be simplified further. We've got some like terms, the 12 and the 49 thirds. We're not going to worry about that today, but if you'd like to add those together, you're welcome to. But as of now, because we're just practicing distribution, this is a good enough answer for me. All right? So, same rules as before. We distribute, we draw our Santa hat. We're really careful with our negative signs that we don't miss them, that we don't forget, that we're going to put them in the calculator correctly. Only now we're letting the calculator multiply fractions for us instead of just multiplying integers. Okay? And I know a lot of you are still nervous with fractions, and one thing that some of you may want to do, and I'll show you right here on our first try together problem, but some of you, out here in front I have a 5/2, and inside the parenthesis I have negative 2x plus 6 over 15. That 5/2, all that is a number. It's just like if in front we had a 5 instead of 5/2. So if it helps you to go through and highlight these fractions and put them together like that 5/2, if it helps you to highlight it so that you can just see, look, that's just that right there, that 5 over 2, that's just a number. And this 6 over 15, that's just a number. And on this next problem, this 2 over 5 in front of the y, that 2 over 5, that's just a 2/5. That's just a number that I'm multiplying by y. If it helps you to highlight things like that, I've got plenty of highlighters you can always borrow and use, or you can use something of your own. But let's work through these examples, make sure that we're doing the math correctly. I've got 5/2 out in front, so step one is to circle that 5/2 and the sign attached to it. I don't have a sign in front of it, so it's just a positive 5/2, and then I'm going to draw my Santa hat. I'm going to distribute the 5/2 to the negative 2x, and I'm going to also distribute it to my 6 over 15. Okay, so in my calculator, let's give that a shot. We're going to do 5 on top, 2 on the bottom, 5/2 times just a negative 2. When I hit enter, that becomes negative 5, but I need to remember that I have an x. So negative 5 x's, and then I put a plus sign. Now I need to do 5/2 times 6/15. So again, my fraction button, 5 on top, 2 on the bottom, times, it's a positive 6 over 15. So I'm going to do another fraction button, 6 on top, 15 on bottom, and when I hit enter, my answer becomes 1. So negative 5x plus 1. And everything looks good here, so I'm going to assume that that's the right answer. Okay, moving on to number 2. Negative 2 3/7. I know a lot of you have learned that this is the best form to write the numbers in, but when we're doing math, it's usually easier for it to be an improper fraction. Right now, I really don't care what form it's in because all I'm going to do is put it in my calculator and it's going to do the math for me. So I'm going to go ahead and circle my negative 2 3/7 because that's what I'm distributing. And I'm going to draw my line from it to 2/5 y and from it to a negative 4. And now I'm going to put it in my calculator and do the multiplication. So my first one is negative 2 3/7. Remember, to get that 2 in front, when we hit our fraction button, we have to do second, and you can see that mixed number in green right above the fraction button. So negative 2 3/7 times 2/5, so 2 on top, 5 on bottom. When I hit enter, I get negative 34 35ths, and that y is going to follow it. So negative 34 35ths with a y after. And then I'm going to put a plus because I always do. Now I want to do negative 2 3/7 multiplied by a negative 4. So negative 2 3/7 multiplied by negative, I'm going to be really careful that I get that negative sign, by negative 4, and I get 68/7. So plus 68 over 7. Now these aren't very pretty fractions. I'm okay with that. I don't have to do any more math with it, and even if I did, I'm using my calculator to do the calculations for me. So even though these aren't the nicest looking fractions, they don't scare me, they don't worry me, because I'm just going to put them in the calculator. It's going to be doing the thinking for me. All right. Now number 3, Out here in front of the parentheses, I've got a negative 3.5, so I'm going to circle that whole thing, negative 3.5, and then I'm going to distribute that to my 2.5 x's, and I'm going to draw a little squiggly Santa hat here, and that's going to go to negative 17.4. All right, so negative 3.5 multiplied by 2.5x, and when I hit enter, I get negative 8.75. So negative 8.75 x's, and then I'm going to put a plus. Now negative 3.5 multiplied by negative 17.4, so negative 3.5 times negative 17 point, not negative, negative 17.4. And I hit enter, I get plus 60.9. These are x's, these aren't. I can't put them together, so I'm simplified and I'm finished right there. Number 4, 2.25 distributing to negative 56.8 y's minus 3.6. So I circle my 2.25, I draw my Santa hat, so I'm going to distribute to this first number, and I'm going to distribute to my second term. So 2.25 times negative 56.8 y's, and I hit enter, I get negative 127.8 y's. And then I'm going to put a plus, and I got 2.25, and this time I'm going to multiply it by negative 3.6. And I pushed the wrong button somewhere. Let's see where it is. Multiply by a negative 3.6. Don't forget your multiply button. The calculator doesn't like it when you do so. So 2.25 times negative 3.6. I have everything in right this time. So I hit enter and I get a negative 8.1. So negative 127.8 y's plus negative 8.1. All right, that's it for us doing them together. I would like you to move over to the pause and try problems. Give them all a try. When you're finished, bring it up to me. Let me just check your work and be sure that you're doing this correctly, and if so, we'll get you the practice for the day. A couple of things that you'll notice, and I want you to be careful of, when you get down to number 4, we're multiplying by 0.25. Now, if I want you to remember from 6th grade, if I multiply something by a number less than 0, if I multiply something by a number less than 1, like 0.25, that's less than 1, that's a fraction, 1/4. If I multiply by it, my number actually gets smaller because I'm taking parts of my number, not multiples of my number. So when you multiply 0.25 by these two numbers, they're actually going to get smaller because you're multiplying by a part. You're not multiplying by wholes. So if you see your number get smaller, don't panic, don't worry. It should, it's supposed to. That's what happens when we multiply by a number between 0 and 1. Good luck.